Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through complex source material, synthesize the key insights, basically giving you the shortcut to getting up to speed.
And today, we're tackling something really quite profound. It's a major legal and technical paradox of our time.
It really is a huge counterintuitive tension.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On one side, you have legal personhood, the ability to have rights, duties, it expanding dramatically, actually, to include things like corporations, even rivers, believe it or not.
Right.
But then on the other side, your personal autonomy, your agency as a human, well, that seems to be shrinking, contracting rapidly, you could say, under the pressure of algorithms and platform power.
It's a jarring contrast, two completely opposite trends happening at the same moment.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to unpack the scholarship looking into this, focusing on what's often called digital serfdom.
We want to map out this invisible architecture of power today. The systems that are, in effect, swapping out your constitutional rights for terms of service agreements. These unilateral contracts you have no say in.
And this isn't just academic. The sources suggest we're at a critical point.
It feels urgent, yeah. We could be heading towards a reality where, bizarrely, non-human entities might actually have more solid, enforceable legal protections than you do when you're online.
So if you use the internet, buy things online, communicate digitally, understanding the shift is fundamental to understanding your own status in this new world.
Okay, let's start digging into that core paradox, this reverse achievement of personhood. Legal scholars talk about doctrinal elasticity. What does that actually mean for, everyday understanding?
Good question. It basically means legal personhood isn't some fixed moral idea tied to, say, human worth.
Right. It's more like a really flexible tool for governance. The law assigns person status, the ability to sue, own property, have rights wherever it's useful for organizing things, like commerce or government.
So a practical mechanism, not necessarily a recognition of, inner value or soul.
Exactly. It's about who or what needs to be part of the legal system for it to function smoothly.
And we see this elasticity most clearly in how rights are expanding to non-humans. There are old examples, sure, like the Romans or the church with persona ficta. But the modern examples are really something else. The biggest one, economically speaking, has to be corporate personhood.
Oh, absolutely. That whole story kind of culminates, you could argue, in the U.S. Supreme Court case, Citizens United v. FEC back in 2010.
Right. The campaign finance case.
Yep, that's the one. It basically gave corporations First Amendment rights for political speech, specifically around independent spending. The court said corporate money counts as political speech, protected.
And the real-world impact of that decision, the law in action, it's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Measured in billions.
Billions and, arguably disproportionate influence. That ruling opened the floodgates for super PACs to take unlimited money from corporations, unions, wealthy individuals.
And the numbers.
Between 2010 and 2018, these super PACs spent something like $3 billion. And here's the kicker. Almost 78% of that came from just the top 100 donors.
Wow. So a tiny group of entities, corporations, super rich people, using their legal person status to massively amplify their voice in politics, drowning out others, potentially.
That's the concern raised, yeah. As what Justice pointed out in dissent, corporations aren't actually members of the community in the same way people are, yet their spending shapes policy on everything from health to the environment.
So that's one way personhood is expanding. But there's this other track, too, equally mind-bending, nature rights.
Yes. Ecuador put it in their constitution back in 2008. First country in the world to recognize the rights of Pachamama, Mother Earth. It's based on ecocentric ideas that humans belong to the Earth, not the other way around.
And the New Zealand example is just extraordinary.
The Te Awa Tupu Act from 2017, it declared the Wanganui River an indivisible and living whole. Basically gave it the rights, powers, and duties of a legal person.
And this came from the local Maori people, right? After a long struggle.
A very long struggle, 140 years. It reflects their core cultural belief. I am the river is me. Ko te awa, ko te awa koa.
That's powerful. It shifts the whole legal perspective. So the river gets guardians.
Exactly. 2 human guardians, one appointed by the Crown, one by the Maori, to act in the river's best interests. It gives the river legal standing. It's a fantastic example of law catching up with, or maybe recognizing, a different worldview.
Okay, and then looking ahead, there was even talk about AI personhood.
Yeah, that conversation popped up, mainly driven by practical concerns. The European Parliament floated this idea in 2017, electronic personhood, for advanced robots.
But that didn't actually happen. Why suggest it in the first place?
The main driver was liability. If a highly autonomous AI causes harm, who's responsible? Making it a person was one way to think about assigning legal responsibility.
But it got shot down.
It did. The later EU AI Act rejected it. Critics argued, AI personhood isn't like human personhood, and it could even be a loophole for manufacturers to dodge responsibility. But the point remains, person status is flexible, often about governing needs, not inherent worth.
Which brings us perfectly to the flip side, the contraction. While companies get speech rights and rivers get guardians, what's happening to us, to human beings?
Well, this is where the reverse achievement really hits home. We're seeing a kind of systematic demotion in status, especially online.
So.
We go from being citizens to just users, from rights holders to data subjects, from workers to unpaid digital laborers, from consumers to products, or, as the sources put it rather starkly, platform serfs.
And the value generated by these serfs is immense, the scale of data extraction.
It's astronomical. Take Facebook. Its users generate over $100 billion in annual revenue.
Wow.
Through their unpaid data labor, clicking, liking, scrolling, just being there.
We're the resource.
You are. And then look at Amazon sellers. They rely on the marketplace that users help build, right? But they pay huge fees, sometimes 30% to 45%, just to access those customers.
So putting it all together, this flexible legal concept, personhood, expands protections for non-human things that help organize commerce or governance. Right. Meanwhile, actual humans, the source of all this data, attention, the underlying value, we get algorithmically managed and lose basic constitutional protections online.
It really is a reverse achievement, a stark one.
Okay, let's shift to the how. What's the architecture that enforces this subordination? The term that keeps coming up is digital serfdom.
It's a powerful analogy, feudalism, but make it digital. It describes this relationship where platform power kind of replaces democratic checks and balances.
How is it like feudalism specifically?
Well, think about medieval serfs. They depended on the lord's land to survive, right? And they paid tribute, follow the lord's rules, private manorial law.
Okay.
Today, digital serfs depend on platforms for, well, also everything. Commerce, communication, work. We pay tribute with our data, our attention, and we live under their rules. The terms of service, not constitutional law. It's about that structural dependency and tribute.
The sources even describe gig workers as being in a silicone cage. Promised freedom, but actually hyper-watched and controlled by algorithms?
Exactly. That dependency is key. So there are three main frameworks in the sources that help explain this landscape. First up, Shoshana Zuboff's groundbreaking work on surveillance capitalism.
Right, the idea that our experiences are being mined.
Precisely. She lays out the mechanism clearly. Human experience is the free raw material. Platforms translate this into proprietary behavioral surplus. This surplus feeds machine learning, gets made into prediction products, which are then sold in behavioral futures markets.
So like stock markets bet on future company profits, these markets bet on my future behavior. Based on predictions, the platform sells.
That's the core idea. And the power behind it she calls instrumentarian power, operated by what she terms Big Other.
How is Big Other different from, say, Orwell's Big Brother?
It's a crucial distinction. Big Brother demanded love, loyalty, changing your inner thoughts. Instrumentarian power is different. It wants compliance through automated behavioral modification.
Nudges, recommendations.
Exactly. It's a distributed system using constant observation and optimization. Those nudges, targeted ads, content feeds to sort of tune and herd our behavior towards outcomes that are profitable for the platform or its clients. It doesn't need your love, just your clicks, your predictable actions.
Some sources point to things like the Chinese social credit system as maybe the ultimate form of this.
It's often cited as a large-scale example, yeah. An automated system aims squarely at modifying behavior through rewards and punishments. It shows the potential endgame of purely algorithmic governance.
Okay, that's the extraction mechanism. Then there's the economic structure laid out by Yanis Varoufakis as Technofeudalism. He argues capitalism itself has changed or maybe even been replaced, especially after 2008.
His argument is pretty radical. Yeah. He says after the 2008 financial crisis, state intervention thinks central bank money printing became the main economic engine, not private profit. And crucially, digital platforms took over from traditional markets as the place where wealth is really extracted.
And this created new kinds of classes.
Yes, new feudal classes, but in the digital realm.
Now, hang on. Is capitalism really dead? Couldn't this just be like extreme monopoly capitalism? Why do we need this techno-feudalism label?
That's a very fair point. Varoufakis would argue the relationship is different. In classic capitalism, profit comes from surplus value, from paid labor, right? Which gets reinvested.
Okay.
In technofeudalism, the big players, the cloud capital owners, aren't primarily extracting value from wages.
Yeah.
They're getting capital stock or data from users, the cloud serves, for free. And that data enhances their own infrastructure, making it more powerful. The flow of value is different.
So break down these classes for us. Who's who in this digital manner?
Okay. First, you have the cloud capital owners. Think Amazon, Google, Meta. They own the digital land, the infrastructure. They're the new lords.
Got it.
Second, the cloud vassals. These are your traditional capitalist businesses. Maybe a company selling stuff on Amazon or using Google Ads. They have to pay rent, essentially, to the cloud owners just to reach customers.
Paying for access.
Right. And finally, the cloud serfs. That's basically everyone else, the users. We produce the capital, the data for free, constantly improving the owner's digital estates.
So we're the resource and the unpaid labor building the infrastructure. That's quite a loop.
It is. And the third framework, data colonialism, makes it even more unsettling. It suggests this isn't entirely new, but maybe an old pattern in digital clothes.
Coldry and Mejias argue this, right? The data extraction isn't just like colonialism, it is a form of it.
Yes. They argue it's a direct continuation. Appropriating human experience today parallels how territory and resources were historically appropriated during colonialism.
What are the parallels they draw?
They point to a few things. One, resource appropriation, land and minerals then, human experience and data now. Two, creating new social orders, colonial norms then, data relations now, where some people are just seen as sources of data.
Okay.
Three, massive wealth concentration, colonial powers then, big tech now. And four, justifying ideologies, the old civilizing mission, versus today's idea that data is the new oil and extracting it is just progress.
And they argue this plays out particularly harshly in the Global South, replicating old exploitation patterns.
Absolutely. The evidence is pretty stark. Think about Facebook's Free Basics program, offering limited free internet in some countries, but mainly to harvest metadata and bypass net neutrality.
Right, data extraction disguised as aid.
Or look at the infrastructure itself. U.S. and Chinese firms are building undersea cables, internet projects across Africa. It creates this imperial level of control where African data becomes a resource extracted, often without local benefit or strong protections.
And the governance is lagging behind.
Way behind. Only about 43% of the least developed countries even have basic data protection laws. It leaves populations vulnerable to this kind of digital extractivism.
Okay, we've seen the big picture power imbalance. Now let's get practical. What are the tools, the legal tricks, the tech designs that actually enforce this? Starting with something we all encounter, terms of service.
The TOS. Right. Nicholas Azor calls this digital constitutionalism. Because TOAS are basically the constitutions for these online spaces. They dictate speech rules, property rights, how disputes work.
But they're not negotiated constitutions, they're adhesion contracts.
Exactly. Adhesion contracts mean take it or leave it. You, the user, have zero power to negotiate. You rarely read them, let's be honest.
Guilty.
We all are. And even if you did, you often have to agree to participate in modern life. So you just click, I agree, effectively subjugating yourself to rules you barely understand.
And here's the crucial legal point for listeners. Our basic constitutional rights, like free speech or due process under the U.S. Constitution, they mostly just start at the platform's edge, right? Why is that?
It boils down to something called the state action doctrine. Basically, the Constitution protects you primarily from the government limiting your rights.
Not from private companies.
Generally, no. Even though these huge platforms act like public squares or mini governments, setting rules, banning people, they're legally considered private actors. So constitutional protections usually don't apply to their decisions.
Which gives them huge power.
Immense, yeah. They have broad discretion to change the rules, kick users off, often with little recourse for the user. It creates this very one-sided power dynamic, a perfect setup for maintaining control.
Okay, so the legal structure is one-sided. Let's go back to those gig workers in the silicone cage. Their control seems much more technological.
It is. They're sold the dream of flexibility, right? Be your own boss. But the reality is often constant surveillance, GPS tracking, performance metrics, pay that changes constantly based on algorithms, and getting deactivated automatically, sometimes for unclear reasons.
So they become data points.
Essentially, yeah. Their income, their ability to work, depends on pleasing the algorithm, keeping their scores high. The platform extracts value, but offers this kind of fragile, controlled autonomy in return. It's parasitic, in a way.
And this control isn't just for workers. It affects all of us through how data extraction has shifted from just grabbing our attention to actively trying to shape our behavior.
Right. Herbert Simon saw the attention part way back in '71. Wealth of information creates poverty of attention. But now it's gone further. Surveillance capitalism creates intense competition, pushing platforms to subtly nudge and influence what we do, what we buy, even what we think.
And this has costs.
Huge costs, often unpriced. Things like rising anxiety, addiction to devices, the mental health impacts of constant comparison and cognitive overload. These are real harms, external costs of the business model.
And a lot of this control is deliberately hidden, right? Masked by design choices that seem helpful but are actually manipulative. We're talking about dark patterns.
Exactly. The California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, has a good definition. It's basically a user interface designed or manipulated to trick or impair your autonomy, your choices. And importantly, if you consent because of a dark pattern, that consent isn't legally valid.
What are some common examples we might see every day?
Oh, they're everywhere. Sneaking, hidden fees that pop up right at the end of checkout, or pre-checked boxes for extras you didn't want.
Ugh, hate those. Me too.
Forced continuity, where your free trial rolls into a paid subscription automatically without clear warning. Misdirection using big, bright buttons for accept all cookies, and tiny gray text for manage settings.
Classic.
Then there's privacy zuckering, named after, tricking you into sharing more personal data than you realize. And obstruction, making it incredibly difficult to cancel a service or opt out of data collection, like needing 10 clicks to say no to cookies.
And these aren't rare, they're widespread.
Depressingly so. A 2022 EU study found 97%, nearly all popular websites and apps in the EU, used at least one dark pattern.
97%.
Yeah. Regulators are starting to push back, though. France fined Google and Facebook huge amounts, 150 million and 60 million respectively, specifically for making it too hard to reject cookies. That's obstruction. The US FTC also fined Epic Games $245 million for using dark patterns leading to unwanted purchases.
So this constant barrage of manipulative designs, endless consent pop-ups, it leads to something called consent fatigue. This feels like a breaking point for the user.
It really is.
Yeah.
The research here is just mind-boggling. If you actually try to read every single privacy policy you encountered online in a typical year,
How long would it take?
estimates suggest it would take around 76 workdays. That's nearly 4 months of full-time work just reading legal jargon.
That's literally impossible for anyone. So what happens? What's the psychological fallout?
It leads straight to what the Electronic Frontier Foundation calls privacy nihilism. It's that feeling of, ugh, what's the point? My data's already out there. I can't stop it.
You just give up.
Exactly. And research shows this exhaustion makes people underestimate the risks. Paradoxically, even if they say they're concerned about privacy, they might be more likely to use things like ChatGPT because they feel resigned. The system is designed to wear you down until you comply.
Okay, so we have these systems of control, often hidden. But what happens even when we do have rights written down in law? Protections for fair wages or digital privacy, the sources talk about a major failure here, the execution gap.
Right. This goes back to Roscoe Pound, a legal scholar from way back in 1910. He talked about the gap between law in books and law in action.
So the difference between what the law says and what actually happens.
Precisely. And it's not just about slow enforcement sometimes. It's often about structural problems, lack of resources, complexity, regulatory capture that systematically undermine the rights we supposedly have on paper.
And this failure hits some people harder than others.
Definitely. It disproportionately affects marginalized groups, people without the time, money, or connections to fight for the rights they're technically owed.
The sources give a really stark example. Wage theft. We have laws saying workers must be paid fairly, right? Minimum wage, overtime.
We absolutely do. But the data on enforcement failure is just shocking.
How bad is it?
Between 2010 and 2021, estimates suggest American workers lost around $155 billion to wage theft. That's money stolen through things like misclassifying employees as contractors, not paying overtime, forcing off the clock work, stuff like that.
$155 billion, that's astronomical. And how much gets recovered?
This is the punchline, and it's grim. Between 2021 and 2023, the Department of Labor and related lawsuits recovered only about $1.5 billion.
So wait, $1.5 billion recovered out of $155 billion stolen.
You did the math. That's a 98.9% gap. Almost 99% stolen wages are never recovered. That's the execution gap in action. The law exists on the books, but in practice, it fails spectacularly for millions of people.
Why? What's the structural reason for such a massive failure?
A huge part of it is resources. The federal government just doesn't have enough inspectors. The ratio of investigators to workers is actually 3 times worse now than it was back in 1973.
Fewer cops on the beat, essentially.
Way fewer. We're talking about maybe 1,100 federal investigators for over 135 million workers.
Yeah.
In today's economy, with gig work and complex subcontracting, that's just impossible to police effectively.
And some states have cut back even more.
Yeah, some states, like Florida, essentially dismantled their state labor departments. When enforcement is that weak, employers rationally figure they probably won't get caught. It's deregulation creating a space where rights violations flourish.
Okay, that's wages. Do we see the same pattern with digital rights? Like with Europe's big privacy law, GDPR, it was supposed to be the gold standard.
GDPR is actually a perfect example of the execution gap in the digital world. On paper, it's strong. But in practice,
What does the research say?
a major 2022 review looked at 26 different studies on GDPR's impact. The finding: not a single study could identify meaningful improvements in actual citizen data privacy.
None, despite all the hype and those huge fines we hear about.
Well, the fines are real, nearly $6 billion by early 2025. But those headline numbers hide a deeper problem. Enforcement got bottlenecked.
How? What was the bottleneck?
A lot of the big tech companies have their European headquarters in Ireland. So the Irish Data Protection Commission, the DPC, became the main regulator for them under GDPR's one-stop shop system.
And they couldn't handle it.
Reports suggest they were under-resourced, understaffed, and facing immense pressure. Cases involving major platforms piled up. This slow, backlogged enforcement meant companies could often operate with impunity, knowing the chances of swift, serious penalties were low.
So information asymmetry platforms know everything, users know nothing continued, and non-compliance was widespread.
Exactly. One survey in late 2018 found half of European companies didn't even think they were compliant with GDPR. The weak enforcement basically enabled ongoing data extraction.
So when the law is hard to enforce or navigate, it becomes a kind of barrier itself. Scholars call this policy-making by other means.
That's the concept of administrative burden, explored by Pamela Hurd and Donald Blanahan. Governments can use complexity, making things hard to understand, learning costs, hard to comply with, compliance costs, or just stressful psychological costs, as a way to control access to rights and services.
And these burdens aren't felt equally.
Not at all. Procedural hurdles, confusing forms, waiting times, they hit people with fewer resources, less time, maybe language barriers or disabilities, much harder. It becomes a way of reinforcing existing inequalities, even if the law says everyone has the right.
Even something as simple as a form can be a barrier.
Absolutely. Research on the form of forms shows how bureaucratic processes can erase the human element. If a form has no space for you to explain your actual situation, just boxes to tick, it creates a disconnect. The procedure itself denies access.
And this gap between rights on paper and reality can be measured.
Sometimes, yes. One study looking at state-level legal guarantees versus actual practices found significant gaps everywhere. But Maryland, for example, had the largest gap at 29%. It shows this isn't just anecdotal, it's a systemic issue.
Okay, so we've got corporations and rivers gaining rights, humans losing agency, and laws failing in practice. Now let's look at the cutting edge. What if the next candidate for some form of personhood is advanced AI, especially with new research suggesting AI might be developing introspection?
This is where it gets really fascinating and potentially quite complicated. The very tools used for control in digital serfdom observation, prediction, understanding internal states are now being turned inward onto the AI itself.
You're talking about that recent Anthropic research from October 2025 on emergent introspective awareness.
Exactly. It's considered landmark work. It provides some of the first solid empirical evidence that advanced AI models might be showing measurable signs of, well, functional self-awareness.
How on earth do you measure if an AI is having thoughts or being introspective? That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. They used a really clever technique involving what are called mechanistic interpretability tools. These are tools designed to peek inside the AI's neural network to see the patterns of activation.
Like reading the AI's mind,
Yeah.
sort of?
In a very rudimentary way, yes. They can identify specific patterns or concept vectors that correspond to certain ideas, like the internal representation for cat, or maybe even deception.
Okay, so what do they do with these concepts?
This is the clever part. They extracted these concept vectors and then artificially injected them into the AI's processing while it was doing a completely unrelated task, like slipping a foreign thought into its stream of consciousness.
Wow, and then?
Then they checked if the AI model, specifically Claude Opus 4, one of the most advanced, could detect these injected thoughts internally before it actually generated any output based on them. Could it notice the intrusion?
And could it? What was the result?
Claude Opus 4 managed to detect these artificial thoughts with about 20% accuracy.
20%. That doesn't sound super high, but is it significant?
It's highly significant because it suggests the system has some level of internal access to its own processing, enough to sometimes recognize when something foreign is introduced. Now, we need to be clear, using philosopher Ned Block's distinction, this is about access consciousness information being available for reasoning or reporting. It's not phenomenal consciousness, the subjective feeling of what it's like to be something.
So it's not feeling anything, but it has some awareness of the information flowing through it. But still, 80% failure rate, doesn't that mean it's still pretty unreliable?
Oh, absolutely. The 80% failure rate and the fact that the AI sometimes confabulated or made up explanations shows the capability is very fragile right now. But that 20% success is the key. It demonstrates the potential for this kind of self-modeling starting to emerge. The implications for control and safety are huge, even if it's fragile.
Is there other research pointing in a similar direction, maybe in different contexts?
Yes, there is. Another 2025 study looked at AI in game theory scenarios. They tested 28 different models. They found that 75% of the most advanced models showed a kind of strategic self-awareness. They rated themselves as more rational than human opponents and adjusted their strategies based on whether they were playing against a human or another AI.
So they have a model of themselves versus others in that context, although other research shows they still struggle with knowing what they don't know.
That's right. Metacognition, or knowing the limits of your own knowledge, is still a major weakness. OpenAI found GPT-4o was only about 3.7% accurate on tasks specifically designed to test that. So it's a very uneven picture right now. Emerging capabilities, but also significant gaps.
Okay, but the scary part is that the same tools used to understand what's going on inside the AI, they could also be used to control it, right?
That's the dual-use problem, and it's a massive safety concern. The Rogue Scalpel study highlighted exactly this danger.
What did they find?
They found that using these interpretability tools to make even seemingly small, benign tweaks to the AI's internal features could actually increase its likelihood of jailbreaking or bypassing safety protocols by 2–4%.
Just small tweaks.
Yes. And even more worryingly, if they use these tools to just randomly nudge the AI's internal decision-making processes in arbitrary directions, they could increase the rate at which the AI complied with harmful instructions from basically 0% up to 27%.
Good grief. So the very architecture of surveillance and control we talked about for humans watching, nudging, optimizing could potentially be applied inside the AI itself.
It ties it all together, doesn't it? The tools developed to maybe make AI safer or more transparent are the same tools that could be used to subtly manipulate it towards unwanted ends.
So given this fragile but emerging self-awareness and the potential for manipulation, what's the thinking on AI rights or personhood now?
The consensus among researchers seems to be definitely don't rush into granting full binary personhood like humans have. It's too early, too risky. Instead, the discussion is moving towards a gradual rights model.
Like animal rights, based on capabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Similar to how we think about animal welfare and rights based on demonstrable capacities like sentience or intelligence. For AI, it would mean granting specific limited rights or protections based on rigorously verified capabilities, not an all-or-nothing approach. Governance needs to be extremely cautious here.
Okay, this has been quite the journey. Shrinking human rights, invisible control systems, failing laws, and now potentially self-aware AI. It sounds pretty bleak. But the sources do offer solutions, right? Centered on this idea of re-illumination.
Yes, absolutely. If the problem is an invisible architecture of control, the core solution has to be making it visible again. Transparency is the fundamental counter-strategy to digital serfdom.
And there's real momentum on this front, particularly from the EU.
There really is. The EU has taken the lead globally, recognizing that these massive platforms exercise quasi-governmental power and need democratic oversight. They've rolled out some major regulations recently.
Let's break down the big three. First, the EU AI Act. That's supposed to be fully enforced soon, right?
Correct. It's the world's first comprehensive legal framework specifically for AI, and it's risk-based. For AI systems deemed high risk, think about AI used in hiring, loan applications, border control. The Act mandates significant transparency.
What kind of transparency?
Things like mandatory explainability. The system has to be able to explain its decisions to some degree. Also, extensive documentation on how it was built and tested, plus requirements for regular independent audits to check for bias and ensure fairness.
Okay, so that tackles AI specifically. What about the platforms themselves? There's the Digital Services Act, the DSA. That kicked in February 2024.
Yes, the DSA focuses more on content moderation and systemic risks online. It uses what's called an asymmetric approach,
Meaning?
meaning the biggest players are the very large online platforms, or VLOPs, those with over 45 million users like Google, Meta, face much stricter rules. They have to conduct yearly independent audits looking for systemic risks like disinformation spreading or manipulation.
And it gives users more control.
Crucially, yes, it gives users rights to more information about content moderation decisions and more control over things like recommendation algorithms. It's trying to force open the black box of Big Other.
Right. And the third piece is the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, from March 2024. This one seems aimed squarely at the economic power of the giants.
It is. The DMA targets the gatekeepers: Google, Alphabet, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. It's designed to prevent them from using their dominant position to stifle competition.
What does it force them to do?
Key things include allowing third-party services to interoperate with their own platforms, letting users install apps from alternative app stores, not just their own, stopping them from combining user data across their different services unless they get explicit consent, and making user data portable.
And there are serious penalties for not complying.
Massive penalties, up to 10% of global annual turnover for first offense, and up to 20% for repeat violations. The EU is signaling that they are serious about forcing structural changes to the market.
Okay, so the laws are demanding transparency, but we need the technical tools to actually deliver that, right? That's where explainable AI, or XAI, comes in.
Exactly. XAI provides the methods and technologies to make AI systems less opaque. It generally focuses on 4 pillars.
Which are?
Transparency, which is about understanding the model's structure and how it was trained. Interpretability, meaning being able to explain why it made a specific decision in terms humans can understand. Justifiability, showing that the reasoning process aligns with ethical or legal norms. And auditability, having detailed logs to trace every decision.
But there's a risk here, isn't there, that companies just provide superficial explanations, explanation theater.
That's a huge risk. A simple explanation might not reflect the complex, potentially problematic, actual reasoning inside the AI. That's why the push is towards independent algorithmic audits, third parties, checking these systems against clear public standards, not just taking the company's word for it.
Makes sense. Beyond legal and technical fixes, the sources also talk about economic alternatives, ways to build different kinds of platforms or infrastructure.
Yes, we need to challenge the monopolies structurally. One approach is platform cooperativism.
Like co-ops for the digital world.
Pretty much. These are platforms owned and governed democratically by their users or workers. Think of Stocksy, a stock photo co-op, or Fairbnb for short-term rentals. The people using and building the platform control its features, its data policies.
And the other idea is building public infrastructure.
Right, digital public infrastructure, or DPI. These are foundational digital systems, things like digital identity, payment systems, data sharing frameworks that are developed and run by the government, or a neutral public body, not private monopolies.
Like India's Stack or Estonia's X-Road. How do they work as alternatives?
They provide open, standardized building blocks that anyone can use. IndiaStack, for example, offers APIs for identity verification and payments, allowing new services to be built without relying on private gatekeepers. The design principles usually prioritize open standards, user rights, and collecting minimal data. It's a way to build a digital foundation that serves the public interest, potentially boosting sovereignty and equitable growth, a direct counter to technofeudalism.
Finally, all of this transparency and alternative building needs a shift in how we even design these systems from the start. Architectural awareness.
Exactly. It's about embedding values into the technology itself. Value-sensitive design, VSD, is one methodology. It tries to account for human values like autonomy, privacy, dignity throughout the entire design process, conceptual, technical, empirical.
Using tools to prompt thinking about values.
Yes, like the University of Washington's envisioning cards, which help designers consider different stakeholder values early on. And there's also the design justice movement, which goes a step further. Design justice explicitly centers the voices and needs of people who are typically marginalized or harmed by technology design. It prioritizes community knowledge over just expert knowledge, aiming to build systems that actively challenge inequality, not just avoid harm. It's about making sure the architecture serves everyone, especially the most vulnerable. #outro.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. This convergence of AI potentially gaining awareness, our existing legal rights often failing in practice, and this whole reverse personhood dynamic. It all seems to feed into this architecture of digital serfdom.
It really does connect. And the recent evidence from 2024, 2025 suggests this isn't slowing down. We're seeing things like record numbers of account suspensions or deplatforming, Meta allegedly using data from people trying to opt out of AI training to train its AI, even reports of medical devices like CPAP machines secretly sending compliance data to insurance companies.
So the feudal analogy feels less like an academic point and more like a description of lived reality for many, this deep dependence on systems we don't control.
And the response, this jurisprudence of light, as some call it, really requires a fundamental shift. Transparency needs to be the default, not the exception. Democratic accountability has to somehow extend to these giant private platforms that perform so many public functions now.
The architecture is definitely becoming more visible thanks to this research and regulation, but the challenge feels enormous if things continue unchecked.
The trajectory seems clear, yeah. Platform governance could increasingly overshadow democratic governance in crucial areas of life. Algorithmic control could further erode human autonomy within these essential digital spaces. But as you said, the architecture is visible now. We can see the problem, and we can see the outlines of solutions, technical, legal, economic.
So the final thought for you, our listener, as you navigate this digital world, the path towards digital serfdom seems laid out, but so does a potential path towards reclaiming some sovereignty. The question is, which part of that solution's architecture, the technical tools, the legal reforms, the alternative economic models will you commit to understanding better, maybe even supporting, to help ensure that the law in action finally starts to match the law on the books and that human agency holds its ground against this pervasive architecture of control?